start off, here's the Spanish colonialism in the Philippines, a real-life situation that depicts dependency theory. The Spanish colonial experience in the Philippines provides insights into the historical roots of economic and structural imbalances, and Locke explains the dependency theory. During the Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines, lasting from 1565 to 1898, there was a significant economic exploitation of the colony. The Spanish colonizers established an economic system that primarily served the interests of Spain. Spain's primary interest in the Philippines was resource extraction, resources including valuable goods such as spices and precious metals were extracted from the Philippines and sent to Spain, contributing to the economic prosperity of the Spanish Empire. This economic relationship reflects the core periphery dynamic outlined in dependency theory, where the colonized periphery, the Philippines, served the economic interests of the colonizing core, the Spain. The Philippine economy became structured around meeting the needs of the colonial power. The trade relations between the Spain and the Philippines were characterized by an equal exchange. The Philippines exported raw materials and goods, often at low prices, while importing manufactured products from the Spain at higher costs. This contributed to a dependency on the Spanish economy. The Philippines occupied a peripheral economic position within the Spanish colonial empire. The colonial administration prioritized extracting resources for the benefit of the metropolis or Spain, leaving the local economy underdeveloped. Economic and political structures in the Philippines were largely controlled by Spanish authorities. The local elites were often intermediaries who facilitated the extraction of resources for the benefit of the colonial power. Dependency theory also considers the cultural and social dimensions of dependency. During the colonial period, Spanish influence extended beyond the economic realm, encompassing language, religion, and societal structures. The imposition of Spanish cultures and institutions had a lasting impact on the Philippines. This cultural influence, according to the dependency theory, can perpetuate dependency as it shapes the mindset and structures of the colonized society, potentially hindering independent development. Even after gaining independence from Spain in 1898, the Philippines continued to face challenges related to dependency, as the economic and social structures established during the colonial period persisted. The legacy of dependency has influenced the Philippines' economic policies, political institutions, and global positioning. Dependency theory. Dependency theory is a theoretical framework that proposes the reliance of economically disadvantaged nations on wealthier counterparts. It goes further and indicates that this dependency is not caused by chance, but is caused by wealthier nations by destabilizing the weak countries and causing them to be in need. The rich exploit the countries and their raw materials, that subsequently indebting them for their own benefit. Dependency theory explains that underdeveloped nations enrich advanced countries with resources at their own expense. This theory was formulated in 1960 to respond to a statistic by a researcher known as Raoul Prebisch. In his research, he noted that the wealth of the advanced nations came from the developing ones. Therefore, dependency theory holds that developing nations are entirely dependent on the advanced nations, and this limits them from becoming industrious. The dependence theories are explained in many forms, one of them being colonialism. Colonialism suggests that advanced nations took over new territories, and in the process, they used military and political influences in order to take control of the resources of the new regions.
Dependency theories classifies states into two main categories, the core states and the peripheral states. So the first one is the core states. So core states are the economically advanced and industrialized nations that hold significant economic and political power. So it is also considered the dominant or central actors in the global economic system. Next one is the peripheral states. So peripheral states, or on the other hand, are less developed nations that are economically dependent on core states. So they are often providers of raw materials and a cheap labor, but may lack diversified industries and advanced technology. And peripheral states tends to have a weaker economies and face challenges in achieving sustainable development.
The dependency theory stated that the global economic system is divided into the core, the developed nations, and the periphery, the third world, and that there is an unequal dependency between the two. The core exploits the peripheral states for cheap labor and resources, and the peripheral states import the more expensive finished goods from the core states. Both of these are dependent on each other, but this dependency is not mutually beneficial. The core keeps getting more and more developed, while the periphery will be stuck in the perpetual state of underdevelopment because of the capitalist model that the global economic system follows, according to this theory. Some theories suggest that this asymmetrical flow is also mirrored inside the economy of a nation. The urban sector of developing nations is usually more powerful politically and economically, while the rural sector remains underdeveloped and neglected, even though that it is where the raw materials and labor is procured from. The solutions to the problem of dependency are provided by two different types of dependency theories: the moderates, such as Raoul Brevish, and the revolutionaries. The moderates suggest that developing countries should form blocs and come together to have more united front so that they have a lesser chance of being blatantly exploited by the core states. Another suggestion is that the more privileged citizens of the state should invest and divert their funds into development of the nation. The revolutionaries believe that this is a very idealistic view that is improbable and call for a more drastic change in the global economic system, which is currently based on a very capitalist structure. The dependency theory has been critiqued by many as well, because it assumes that capitalism is the reason for the underdevelopment of the nations.
The origin of world systems theory. The world systems theory was proposed by the American sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein in the 1970s as an alternative to the then popular modernization hypothesis, which Wallerstein criticized on three grounds. One, it was built using only the nation state as the unit of analysis. Two, it proposed that there existed only one path to development for all states, the one followed by the developed countries. It was believed that the poor countries of today are simply primitive versions of the rich countries, and if they were to allow the same trajectory as that one, the rich countries would eventually become developed too. 3. It did not take into account transnational structures such as large business corporations that influence the development of states. Wallerstein believed that the modernization theory and other such models were the product of 19th century ways of thinking that believed in the compartmentalizing knowledge, which meant that such an approach could only look at the problems of development and underdevelopment through the lens of either developmental economics or political science. What Wallerstein proposed instead was a unified system approach that did not limit itself to any one subject or approach for analyzing global issues, but combined the spheres of society, economy, and politics.
Political sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein is credited with formulating our modern concept of world system theory, though Wallerstein himself resists the word theory and preferred to call his concept world system analysis. After 3 years of service in the U.S. Army in the early 1950s, Wallerstein became active in academia. He defined world system theory in 1974 and continued to develop it throughout his academic career. Wallerstein's world system analysis is closely related to and builds upon dependency theory, the idea that resources and labor flow from developing countries to developed countries. This creates a situation where developing countries are perpetually dependent upon developed countries for financial aid, which ensures they remain economically stagnant and which allows developed countries to continue exploiting them. This is essentially how developing countries are integrated into the world system. World System Theory. World System Theory is a socio-economic and political approach that explains the economic development and dynamic of capitalistic world economy, analyzing the mechanism of international market trade, economic division of labor between core and periphery regions, and its interest of capitalist class in market. A view of the world in which countries are placed in different economic classes to explain their economic relationship with one another. World system theory emphasizes the role of individual countries. Instead of the United States as a superpower, for example, world system theory emphasizes the global economic hegemony of the West in general, of which the United States is a part. World system theory also downplays the role of culture in favor of the impact of the global economy. In fact, the global divisions that define world system theory are very similar, in their own way, to the socio-economic class conceived by Karl Marx, namely the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
Three-tier structure of the world systems theory by Emanuel Wallerstein. World systems theory divides the world into three main components: core, semi-periphery, and periphery. Each component plays a distinct role in the global economic system. Core, a small set of technologically advanced and industrialized capitalist nations or regions characterized by higher incomes, large tax bases, and higher standards of living. In the 21st century, the developed countries that form the G7 group along with China can be considered the core of the world system. Additionally, core is the group of countries that has economic hegemony over all other countries. They exploit the resources and the labor of periphery countries and are themselves exploited by no other countries. Next is the semi-periphery. These countries act as the periphery to core countries and as core to the countries on the periphery. Typically, such countries are regional powers with moderate levels of development indices and growing capitalist economies. In the 21st century, countries such as India, Brazil, Turkey, Mexico, Israel, and Nigeria can be considered the semi-periphery of the world system. Additionally, semi-periphery are countries exploited by the core but able to exploit the periphery. Lastly, the periphery. These are poor countries that primarily subsist by exporting primary products such as agricultural produce and natural resources to the core countries. The periphery is characterized by small tax base, low incomes, and low levels of human development index. In the 21st century, much of sub-Saharan African, parts of Latin America, and Central Asia are considered to be periphery. Additionally, periphery is the group of relatively poor countries that are exploited by the core and semi-periphery, and are themselves unable to exploit other nations, the lowest rank on the ladder. That being said, the core, semi-periphery, and periphery are roughly analogous to our socio-economic concepts of developed, developing, and least developed. But the important thing to remember is that world systems theory prioritizes economic dominance over any other factor, and is a way of discussing spatial variations of economic development.